wanted to share with you a couple excerpts out of the chapter about the uprising in Ferguson when Michael Brown was murdered in August 2014. It's called Ferguson and the Power of Liberation. And I've been thinking a lot about uprisings over this past year. Well, really, I always think about uprisings, but what does it mean to rise in our power when there's nothing else to lose? And, when I think about this time during COVID, we think of it as so different. And it is, but we're still in the same struggle of decolonizing our minds and understanding that we actually have the power to change the world and create the world that we want to live in. And I think it's so important right now that we don't lose sight of the power that we have to refuse to go along with the violence of this state. And we have to be more creative, and our imagination is one of our most powerful tools. But it was the uprising in Ferguson that I feel like really reignited for many of us in this country who've been organizing for a better world, that inspired us of what is possible. So a couple excerpts out of this chapter. And I start this chapter also with a quote from Lilia Watson, who is an Indigenous woman. It's a quote we all well know, and if you don't, well, "If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." And I do feel like in this moment we are watching, through the mutual aid work, a new moment where we are understanding that we are interdependent and we need one another. We don't need the state. The state is not here to help us, but we need each other. So how do we keep creating these patterns of a new world, of our connections, our mutuality, our solidarity? When the people of Ferguson rose up in August 2014, years of pent-up anger poured into the streets, fully righteous against police violence and murder. Michael Brown, an unarmed teenager, was shot in the street near his home and left to die, lying out in the sun for 4 hours and 25 minutes. The anger of the protesters, combined with the militarism of the police, created a dance of power that went on for weeks, months, and then years, as people all over the country woke up to the reality of a country fractured by racism. The struggle in Ferguson was waged by poor Black people who had had enough. Day after day, night after night, hundreds gathered in vigils, marches, and lines with their hands in the air chanting, "Hands up, don't shoot." They laid bare their pain and vulnerable bodies to tear gas, stun grenades, rubber bullets, live bullets, police clubs, and arrests. The people refused to back down, and in doing so, birthed a new era of the Black liberation movement, which had been seeded 2 years earlier in February 2012, when Trayvon Martin, another young, unarmed Black teen, was killed by George Zimmerman, who was acquitted under Florida's Stand Your Ground law. Then, in early July 2014, Eric Gardner was killed by New York police for selling cigarettes. They kneeled on his neck as he yelled, "I can't breathe," but they did not let up, murdering another Black man and father. When Michael Brown was killed, the movement exploded. It was out of the box and it was not going back. Ferguson was not about size, but heart. The resistance, both structured and organic. There was a willingness to be visible and raw in pain, sorrow, and anger, demanding that the world know Black lives matter. Police murder of Black and brown people matter. And real accountability for those responsible matters, not just in Ferguson, but in every community across this country. Ferguson was about action. It brought together many sectors, including youth, faith, labor, and peace and justice groups. Some people of faith initially held back in condescension, but with the fierce leadership of Reverend Tracy Blackman and Reverend Sekou, They rose up in the spirit of Moral Mondays to face the police. Reverend Sekou, a religious leader who grew up in St. Louis, moved them by calling for a willingness to take militant, nonviolent direct action from a place of deep, abiding love against the system. Deep, abiding love against the system. The people in Ferguson did not want to play by the rules because the rules did not serve them. Social change requires a real challenge to state power and the institutions that uphold racism and supremacy. In my life as an organizer, I have often spoken about dismantling structures of oppression while building structures of liberation. We can't do one without the other. In Ferguson, local organizers were wary of outside groups and demanded that white folks recognize their privilege. My experience in Ferguson caused me to reflect on how much I still must learn about building an anti-racist world. These changes will not come easy. Centuries of structural and systemic oppression are so deeply embedded that neither white folks nor many people of color truly understand all the ways in which racism and capitalism have made us sick. Dismantling the unjust structures that keep huge numbers of our population in trauma, impoverished and uneducated will take intention, resources, and healing work. The questions we must ask ourselves: what am I waiting for and how can I contribute? Or better yet, thinking about the words of Reverend Sekou, who counseled clergy on how to respond to Black youth who are angry and upset. Simply tell them, I am sorry it has taken me so long to show up. One of the unforgettable actions prior to the non-indictment was a die-in outside the Tivoli Theater on a popular strip of Delmar Boulevard near Washington University. The plan was for us to play the roles of cops shooting, people dying, and people chalking the bodies and laying down flowers. We divided into 2 marches, each with a set of props for the funeral procession. It was a cold, wet, and lightly snowy day. We carried the coffins, which were donned with bright, vibrant flowers. My group had to walk on the sidewalk where construction was underway, and one in our crew, a larger man named H.J., pulled up a wooden construction stake and started marching with it. The stake was supposed to be a sword to match his large wooden shield that he and others carried to protect themselves from police batons. I was like, oh shit. Being a large Black man with a pointed stick was the kind of thing that could make you a target. I sided up to H.J. and said, do as you wish, just know you could become a target. He did not give a fuck at all. Our 2 groups convened at the intersection a few blocks from the theater. As we arrived, we deployed our traffic blockaders and poured into the streets. Those of us playing the cops shouted and threatened as people put their hands in the air. As we shot them, bodies fell into the street. The snow was coming down softly round as dozens of our onlookers stopped to watch. We carried in the coffins and flowers and mournfully chalked the bodies. Daruba was on the bullhorn telling onlookers his story of what it was like to be a Black man in this world, the sorrow, the anger, the pain. At one point I looked over and saw H.J. just standing there, the shield and sword lowered at each side, a tear coming down his cheek. Gazing into the street at our dramatic scene, he said, I didn't know it could be so beautiful. I too felt tears in my eye. This is the power of direct action. When we create acts of beauty, beautiful, meaningful resistance, something inside of us changes. It is that bittersweet knowing that we can create beautiful worlds and that we can make it so every day using conscious choices. The sweet moment was broken as the amplified voice of the police blared. This is an illegal demonstration. Leave now or you will be arrested. We prepared to complete our action, chanting, stand up, sit down, we do this for Michael Brown. As we planned, these words prompted the dead people to rise up and join the chant. We formed back into one big march and headed right toward the police. We flowed around them and through the spaces between their cars. We knew the best way to confront the fear and potential danger was to move right toward it with our love and light. This is just what we did, and the police could do nothing about it. I was grateful for the young men and women in Ferguson. They were fearless, from the leaders and organizers on down to the kids who just showed up. They took whatever space they could and moved skillfully, emboldening those who might follow. They chanted, "We're young, we're strong, we're marching all night long," and they meant it. Simply put, the youth of Ferguson did not back down when they faced police or politicians. I watched people kneel in the street, laying their bodies bare to whatever the police might choose to do. They did not care about the media. They did not care about messaging. They did not care about making friends with politicians or bankers. They had one another, and that was enough. And of course, they were not rising up against police violence alone. In the words of one of their chants, "The whole damn system is guilty as hell." They were rising up against the school-to-prison pipeline and institutions that criminalize and cage. They were calling for an end to laws and policies that kept communities in the cycle of poverty. They were calling for an end to police abuse and racial profiling. They were demanding accountability for police violence and community-based alternatives to incarceration. The youth were fighting for their lives. According to a 2017 report, in 2016, young Black males were at least 9 times more likely to be killed by police than other Americans. African Americans are 4 times as likely to experience the use of violence during encounters with police, and 1 in 3 African American men will go to jail at some point in their lifetime. The criminalization begins at a young age. In many of the nation's largest school districts, including New York and Chicago, there are more police officers per school than counselors, and students are arrested for offenses like talking back to their teacher and disorderly conduct. As someone who spent decades interacting with police, I have a deep understanding of the fear of law enforcement, yet I cannot imagine what it is like to be targeted by police just for being Black, knowing that the badge is a license to kill.